We're sorry. All of our representatives are still assisting other customers. Please remain on the line as we now do your call.
With over 2,000 flood stories worldwide, we may conclude, even without geological evidence, that there was a global catastrophic flood. There are many theories and some facts that we will be investigating during the sequence of these videos. We can see from the map showing the Ice Age from around 21,000 years ago that there was an ice mass across the North Pole. This ice mass was extremely large. As a matter of fact, it was as large as Europe and China put together. Although a massive meltdown took place 12,000 years ago, there were 3 or 4 major episodes of flooding. Some of these catastrophic floods increased sea levels up to 30 to 34 feet. This flooding would occur within a short time frame. We have witnessed the ferocity of oceans during the recent tsunamis, but can you imagine this happening on an Earth-sized scale? It is not for us to believe in myths as proof. It is for us to find proof within the myths. And so we look for evidence in geology and not mythical history. Our first piece of history taken from geology is off of this world. It is a rock referred to as Big Bertha, or more precisely, lunar sample 14321. The fascinating fact is that the oldest known rock from the Earth was found on the moon by Apollo 14 astronauts. What could have caused a rock from the Earth to have struck the moon surface so many years ago? Scientists have determined Big Bertha to be 7 billion years old. If you're wondering how scientists discovered this rock on the moon was from Earth, it's quite simple really. The rock is made up of components found on Earth and not the moon. So before we go any further, let's remember why we're making this video. We are making this video in order to bring the light of day to the story of the flood. Although there are many stories globally about the flood, there is only one story of Noah. But would I be naive to throw away all the other stories about the flood? What of the story of Gilgamesh of Sumeria? And what of the myths of Viracocha among the Mayans and his connection to the deluge that had plagued the people before the Mayans, the great builders of civilization? Also, in a related sense, we must mention giants, as we find these stories globally, and with the flood stories often speaking of the destruction of giants by a god or demigod. Would it be disingenuous just to study all this to prove a story in the Bible? You see, you must understand, the Bible is made up of stories, many stories told over time. Have the stories been changed? Do the stories matter as much as they did once in our recent past? It's important for me to make myself clear here. I'm a Christian and I do believe in the Bible. I believe the Bible relates to stories to me on a spiritual level, and fascinatingly enough, even on a historical level. Although this investigation starts off centralized around geology and the sciences of Earth, it will inevitably end up investigating man's relationship with God and God's relationship with the sons of God. I want to investigate the race of humans that came before Adam and Eve. Is it so radical to believe or assume that when Cain was kicked out of the wilderness, that he found people, a settlement, towns, and a wife? The land of Nod, west of Eden, was where Cain settled. And it's obvious to me that civilization, in one sense or another, was occurring during the lifetime and perhaps even before the creation of man, quote unquote. Although this point is not made clear in the Bible, we can assume this by indirect logic. Like if I said we all jumped in and we all got wet, it wouldn't be outlandish for you to assume that there was a lake or pool involved in that story. And that's how I have come to the conclusion that Cain moved into a region where there were people already. It is my assertion that many civilizations created by God are not directly spoken of in the Bible or the Torah. Sometimes the Bible forces us into looking for information between the lines. When Cain made his way out of the wilderness, did he not find a wife? And did he not have children? When Cain was banished to roam the wilderness, he was in fear of being killed. God said he put a mark on Cain's head, and that would protect him against violence. I assert that the violence he was being protected from was not from the animal kingdom, but most likely from other humans. Does searching for truth between the lines of the Bible break my Christianity or muddle up the narrative of my faith? No, as a matter of fact, I believe it's a realistic way of looking at how God injected his spirit into humanity, and how the creation had lost its way with the sons of God in a forgotten time in an untold story. It is my belief that there was a civilization before our history, and it is my goal to study the evidence that points to the creation of God's children. I believe that at one time we were far more advanced in many ways than we are today. It's also my assumption that you might think the same way. And what of Atlantis and the Great Pyramids? Were they built simply by banging rocks and stones with brass chisels? Quite frankly, I find that, pretty preposterous. It's not too far from reality that there might be multiple universes, especially considering that physicists can disagree on even the concept of time.
Quite a popular view these days is that time is a dimension of a four-dimensional block, or at least, let's say, to avoid the word block, which has spatial connotations, which suggests that time is just a sort of space. Let's say we have a four-dimensional continuum, and that time is one of the dimensions of that. I think that makes a lot of sense and is very useful for a lot of purposes. I myself am a believer that there eternally exists a four-dimensional continuum, time being a dimension of it.
The human race, in my assertion, has many transformations, all created from God. But it is also my assertion that man is the creation of a vessel used as a physical mode of perspective. The Son of Man or the Son of God, are we not all the same? Do we not all belong to the Father? Yes, there have been other civilizations of humans, and perhaps even genetically modified humans, as we read from the Bible. Genesis 6, 1-5. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them that they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of human and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of thought of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So could this have been God's great reset? Because we had been genetically modified, to the point where we were no longer pure, and through genetic modifications we had indeed become evil and unstable. But back to the reason for this video. It is the flood we're talking about, and not the tragic reason for the flood. We must take into consideration the effect of overnight flooding and the havoc it would play on the shorelines of societies around the globe. But some might still think the flood never occurred, and yet there's ample evidence that it did. And so let's look at some of this evidence. Some archaeologists believe that the flood might not have happened. Geologists tend to disagree, pointing out facts that the flood had occurred. But let's look at what the geologists have been thinking this whole time. They thought perhaps these stories were actually local stories, and in the future they've all been clumped up into one big story. That's true that floods can happen at the same time in a local region, but for so many civilizations to come up with stories after stories of floods, great floods, that totally change their society and wipe out almost all the humanity, for all of them, over 2,000, to come up with this type of myth or this story, it's beyond coincidence. So let's look into this. We can track back the catastrophic event of a meteor hitting Greenland, creating the Younger Dire cataclysm during the Pleistocene era, melting the polar cap and releasing the fresh water that had built up behind the polar bridge north of Greenland. This event released massive amounts of fresh water into the ocean in a period of less than 3 days. Scientists have long debated whether a massive impact caused the Ice Age climate swing. Researchers discovered a crater buried beneath Greenland ice pack that may be responsible for the Younger Dire area. An international team of researchers, including a NASA geologist, have discovered this large meteorite impact crater hiding beneath more than half a mile of ice in the northwest Greenland region. The Hiawatha crater, found under the Greenland ice sheet, is one of the 25 largest impact craters on the Earth, measuring roughly 1,000 feet deep and more than 19 miles in diameter. This meteor strike hit with so much velocity and power that it actually landed the Big Bertha rock on the moon. The Earth's rejected debris would have placed massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. The carbon spreading globally through the upper atmosphere, darkening the skies with massive clouds filled with ice particles that formed into massive storms, possibly raining hail for weeks across the surface of the globe. It is believed to have helped cause extinction of the mammoths and the mastodons. We know that most woolly mammoths population disappeared between 14,000 and 10,000 years ago. But we must take into consideration the kinetic force that would have superheated rock into molten lava within a matter of seconds. Sending carbon into the atmosphere covering the globe would have created a carbon-induced winter, also known as the greenhouse effect. The reaction of the carbon in the upper atmosphere would have created a significant amount of hail. Most of the younger dyers' black layers or black mats are dark gray or black because of increased organic carbon. Compared to the strata above and below, we find magnetic grains of soot, glass-like carbon, and nanodiamonds globally. Some of the flood stories included Noah, but they also included Atlantis. Written by Plato, who had received it from his family line, had talked of technology and learning that far exceeded what they had after the flood. The Atlantis civilization had its influence around the globe. After the catastrophic event had occurred, humanity basically had to start over again. Many archaeologists and historians believe that these flood stories were just localized events and then later gathered into one large story. But it is hard to consider this when you find geological evidence of flooding from the last ice age. For example, in Florida, you will find underwater caverns with stalactites hanging from the roofs of caves that are deep underwater, knowing that stalactites can only form outside of water by dripping liquid from the ceilings of caves, proving that the water at one point was lower than it is today. All right, well, that concludes the video. The Great Flood, God's Reset, Part 2. Next video, we're going to be looking more into the effects of the flood that occurred worldwide. We saw here that the water at one time in Florida had been much lower than it is now. We'd seen impact craters, obviously melting ice, sending a huge amount of fresh water into the oceans of the world. We've seen evidence, geologically speaking, of this crater. Was it enough to create a worldwide flood? Well, we're going to get into that. We do know one thing for sure, that some of the civilizations that were before the flood, humans before the flood, we're definitely building megalithic monuments or temples or structures. Stones so huge that nobody could possibly even make them or move them today even. Some of the machinery or machined stones. Incredible. Well, we're going to look into that. But we're going to look into also the sons of God. We're going to look at it from a biblical point of view, and also, of course, when I say biblical, I do mean historically. We'll be looking into it. I know that the Bible starts off with Genesis, but there are many Genesis stories in many different civilizations, and I understand that. That doesn't mean to say that the Bible is not speaking of the Genesis. The Bible might be speaking of the Genesis, and there might be many stories that speak of a Genesis, and they might be similar. What I'm trying to say here is that the Bible references the Genesis. Could that be taken from other civilizations? I once spoke to a priest. I studied under Father Mooney for about a year. He was a Catholic priest, and he put it very very smartly. He said that at the beginning there was not a reporter taking down notes of what God did. And that's a Catholic priest. And that made a lot of sense. But the stories that we read in Genesis are fascinating. And that's exactly what I'm going to be looking into. I'm going to be taking a look at that. And from that aspect, we will be looking into the Gilgamesh, the Syrian stories as well. We'll be looking into the Mayan. The point I'm trying to make is that the information we look at is not surrounded by the Bible, although the Bible is our leading force with Paradox 9. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry it took so long to get out. A lot of stuff going on. The next one shouldn't take as long because I've, been doing so much research. I have a lot to put into a video that I couldn't put into this video. So, the Great Flood, God's Reset Part 3 coming up. If you like this video, click on the like, share it. I hope you enjoyed it. And anyway, this is Pete, and I'm out. And this is Paradox 9. Bye.
We're sorry. All of our representatives are still assisting other customers. Please remain on the line as we value your call.
Hey guys, I hope you liked that video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe because I have a lot more coming, some big ones. And if you want to be notified, remember to hit the little bell down below. If you liked it, share it. We want to get all this information out there to everybody. Once again, thank you for watching Paradox 9.